Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Well, friends, you've waited a year, but it is back. Hello, MJ here from the Coaches Panel. Welcome back to another 50 most relevant countdown for the season of 2023. You are going to get 50 consecutive days of podcasts and articles landing at coachespanel.tv talking about who I think are the most relevant players across Supercoach, Dream Team, and AFL Fantasy. Don't worry, draft coaches, we got you covered. We'll tell you where we think these guys should be getting picked up on your team's draft day. Throughout this whole series, you're going to get to spend a lot of time with different members of the Coaches Panel and some of our great mates from across the fantasy footy content creator community. Joining me on this episode, and you get to hear him a lot throughout the preseason. I got Kane. Hello, mate. Happy New Year. And the 50 most relevant back for another year.
Happy New Year, MJ. Yeah, it is. It's always so exciting. I feel like this is when you're really start getting the juices flowing for another season. You always throw up things that get people thinking. It's not always the conventional, this is the top 50, what we think average-wise. I think people at first often think, oh, this is MJ's rankings of 1 to 50, who's going to average the most. Relevance an important word.
It is.
And I know as we go throughout the 50, we go throughout January and Feb, people are in the 50 for different reasons. Sometimes they affect other people. Sometimes it's for a long time. Sometimes it's for the whole season. And I think this guy today is one that is definitely, when you said we're chatting about Aaron Hall, I was a little bit surprised, but then I had to think about it. And I think he does have a lot of relevance as we kick off through the preseason.
And that's the key. You're right. Relevance is not about averaging, although it can be a factor. It's not about scoring ceiling, although it can be a factor. It's not about injury history, although it can be a factor. All of the different things that come together to make a player worth considering in the preseason. At coachespanel.tv, there is an article for you there that kind of explains what are some of the core ingredients that I believe make a player relevant. And again, at the end of the day, it's a subjective list. It's not about me saying I'm right, you're wrong. It's my personal opinion, different friends of the community and from the Coaches Panel contributing to this conversation. And that's what these podcasts and the articles do. It's about having a conversation, and that's what your preseason should be about. It shouldn't be blacklisting guys. It shouldn't be never again listing guys. It shouldn't be, even to some extent, locking guys away. So much can change over the preseason. And today, we're talking about Aaron Hall. I know what a crazy thought, but I feel like we have to talk about him. 32 years of age. He's a defensive eligible option. And despite missing a big chunk of games last year, we still did see some of that Aaron Hall scoring ceiling. A 125 versus the Hawks was his top AFL Fantasy and Dream Team score of the year, while it was 153 against the Crows in Supercoach. By the way, that's also his career high score in that format, while it's a 156 against the Cats back in 2017. He's going to set you back at a price of an average around 90 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team and just shy of the 98 marker in Supercoach. And Kane, when we start to consider these guys in our sides, when we start paying top dollar, while injuries are a factor, and we'll talk about that in a minute, when we're paying for a guy as a 90 defender that's got history of being a 105, 110 defender, it doesn't feel like the name everyone's talking about. But Aaron Hall has to be considered, given just his pure scoring pedigree over the past 18 months.
Oh, that's 100% MJ. When he's got that role, that halfback role, that kick-in role, that give me the ball role that he's had, in the past 2 seasons he has had, he's been a scorer, and he's been one of the best scorers in the competition, not just as a defender, but
that's true.
Period. And you only have to look back at 2022 was, those heights were still reached. Now, it wasn't quite the length that we saw in 2021 when from round 7 onwards, he went at 119
it's
in DT. Played every game, 119, Supercoach a little bit less, 116. Now, we saw last year, that was pretty similar, really, when he was on the
Once
park.
he was fit, yeah.
A lot of those big scores were there. So we know, especially in AFL fantasy, people talk about value. We want to get value guys. We want to get guys that can improve their average. Well, there's no doubt that he can improve upon 90.
No doubt.
Clearly the doubt's the body. Clearly the doubt's the role.
Sure.
We can't really guess on the role as we talk on Jan 1. Now, obviously, as we get closer to the start of the season, that will come to light. And clearly, you're picking him with that knowledge that he has that kick-in role. But MJ, especially in an AFL fantasy, talking about a guy that if you can run him for 6 or 7 weeks and he can go 110 plus,
huge
values coming up. Some of those defenders that you might think are a bit overpriced, but you still maybe like long term. Maybe you just want to see how they play with a new coach. Maybe you want to, maybe you think they're just a little bit too expensive. You want them just to come down a little bit. Aaron Hall's a guy that can really be that broad bent strategy of just a guy gets off to a hot start. He's got big ceiling, and you're hoping for maybe him to make 60 to 80K. The other person you want, let's just say a Sam Doherty to drop 60 to 80K. And then obviously at the same time, if that to happen, you're thinking that Aaron Hall's probably outscoring that guy like Sam Doherty by, 10 points a week.
Yep.
150K, 60 points up your sleeve after 6 weeks. There's a lot of merit in that. Now, clearly the risk is, does it play out that way for 6 weeks? But when you look at the numbers, 110 could be too low for him because in a 5 to 6 week, maybe 7 week sample size, if he pops off one of those 130, 140s, in that stretch, it could be closer to 120, 125, which is quite funny. That's sort of what we saw, wasn't it, with Jack Zeeble when Aaron Hall was out of the team at the start of that 2021 season? And they can just explode, give you points on field, give you quick cash generation.
Absolutely.
And then you flip it and get someone that you feel a bit safer with that might have had a sluggish start to the season. So in AFL fantasy, only one person can win.
That's true.
And this is a guy that has the upside to give you a huge leg up if it pays off.
Well, you look at just this injury crippled year last year that people talk about. 125 in AFL fantasy and dream team, 124, 122, and 113 were his 4 tons for the year. There were 3 additional scores between 90 and 99, and he averaged a 90, but 2 of those games were heavily injury interrupted. One was a first quarter where he got a 12 against the Cats. The other was a late second quarter 50 against the Bulldogs. You look at just the games he plays in full. We're talking about a 103 average. In Supercoach, really, really similar. 5 tons, 153, 129, 123, 119, and a 105, as well as 3 additional scores, 94 to 97. So that's that average of 98.8. But just like in AFL fantasy, if we look for these games where he does play out the game, we'll talk about injury avoidance and tendencies in a moment. We're talking about a guy who's got an average up at 110. And so now in Supercoach, it's Sinclair, Dawson, and Sicily that are the only guys that are better than him going on through that. So it's fascinating to me when we look at this defensive line. A lot of people have made a big deal about the loss of Crisp, Short, and Whitfield, and understandably so, because we haven't really replenished the premium stocks that much. We could probably say Duncan's the only new player in there. We did pick up guys like Dacos, Angus Brayshaw, and a number of others during the 2022 in-season DPP allocations. But what's fascinating to me is to watch that the only real 2 reasons I can see someone not considering Aaron Hall are role, and then the second you alluded to was the injury concern that really last year 3 times it went pear-shaped for him. That's probably, I suppose, Kane, where the confirmation bias is kicking in for people as they see Aaron Hall on the podcast tile here and they're like, MJ, why have you started with a guy I'm not considering? Because February he goes down with that preseason game injury in the Intra Club, April another string, then he does his quad in late July. But as you said, with these guys that have got an injury history, you either start them or you just fade on them for the year.
And that's a funny thing, MJ, I find with these type of guys. And you've seen this over the years too. Fast forward to week 5, Aaron Hall is going at 115 in DT, 115 in Supercoach. all of a sudden people don't start caring about the injury history anymore. Oh, he's healthy because he's scoring. Like, he was always going to score if he's healthy. They're in the same boat.
That's the point. Yeah.
That's the point. So I love that there are people who are steadfast and say, no, durability is huge for me. We know that people that get injured in the past, numbers would say they have more of a chance of getting injured again. That's obviously not to say that, a guy like Sam Walsh hadn't missed a game. And then we go to last season and he's missing multiple. And now he's going to have a delayed start to this year.
Season, yeah.
The injuries are a part of the game. But this is a guy that's ceiling is top.
It's as good as anyone
absolutely
in that back line.
Through this world. And even people might say, okay, if they make 70K, if he makes 70K, is that really enough for the trade? Well, if you've identified another premium that you think might start slow due to, just the way the game style might be, the matchups, 150K with what people do with rookies, when people are moving rookies just to keep the rookie wheel turning for 30 to 40K.
Yep.
I would argue that a guy that could get you off to the races, again, we're talking about a guy that at 90 could easily outperform that by 25 points a week.
In our fantasy dream team,
even if we just take the low sample size of a 6-week gauntlet, that could be 150 more points, say, than a Hayden Young.
Yeah,
at a comparable
price point. Yeah,
comparable price. And that's not to say that Aaron Hall, because MJ, we've seen there's stretches where he can go well over 115 in a stretch. Like that's just the reality. It's not out of this world to say that after 6 weeks he's not averaging 120, 125. If he's got that role, he's proven that is possible. That is very possible. You look at the last 5 games, just to grab a sample size. The last 5 of 2021 was 121.
Yeah.
The last 6 was 124. So that is a possibility. And that is just huge upside. To grab 150 points over your price at that level, that's going to ask a lot of questions of people in round 6 if that happens. I tend to be of the belief that if you're worried about his injury history, you can't touch him in the year. You start with him.
Or you just miss.
Yep, you start with him and you hope that if there is going to be an injury, it's on a Wednesday afternoon. You know about it and you make your trade. And hopefully by then he's given you 100 plus points. You've banked some points, you've banked a little bit of cash, and you move on with the rest of your season.
Yeah, I think it's really simple. The upside for Hall we've discussed about already at length through this. He could be the top scoring defender over the first 6 weeks of the year. Now, it could be longer than that, but we're just talking about his potential early on. With injury-prone players, you start or you fade them. And the reason you do that is because if injury is the reason you didn't pick them in the starting squad, then I find it really hard to justify trading into that, because with every game that goes with an injury-prone player, the injury variance only increases. And so you're now using a trade to get him and now risking an additional trade to get him out, as opposed to just the one trade to trade him out if you've started him through the year and banked those points on the field. So for me, I'm big on, man, if you're looking for some value in your back line, you want someone that could get you to a Doherty, whether it be a 6-week run, for an example, or you're just happy to run the gauntlet week in, week out in like 2021. Man, it doesn't really feel like it hits. Fantastic, go for that. But if injury is the reason you're saying no now, I find it really hard to advocate when you're trading into them during the year because of the risk of multiple trades out. So that's the injury front. Let's talk about the role. Really, really simple. Are North Melbourne going to play him in this preferred role? Is a GOAT going to get this opportunity? Possibly. But the good news for us is you'll know in the preseason. You'll see it through any intra-club and, to a greater extent, preseason matches against other sides. And so if he's not in that role, if he's not in best 22, you fade on picking him because you do not want to invest this amount of salary cap into a guy that you're starting with. So if you're like, oh, I'm not worried about, I don't know about the role. The injury is I'm fine with, but it's role. You'll know as the season goes on. So for me, the first few trades that you use every single season are correctional trades. Anywhere from 2 to 5 are correctional trades. And so often we get so panicked about trading out a premium when they get injured. So don't worry about it. You don't have that problem if you mix the wrong cow. A trade is still equally as valuable as the other trade. So for me, Kane, we'll talk about drafts in a second, but now if you're looking for an upside defender, Hall's got to be on your list. If you're looking for someone that can get you to the top end premium defenders, Hall's on your list. If you like to take the game on a little bit and don't mind a little bit of a risk, Hall's got to be on your list. Because if one if for me is there, we know the injury risk. We know the scoring potential. If he gets the role, oh boy, you got to consider.
Oh, 100% MJ. And we've never had more trades in these
it's true.
limited trade formats. So, the eject button's there whenever you want to push it. Again, some people just won't look at him.
Sure.
That's totally fine. But again, do you want to make potentially, a competition winning move?
Yeah.
Take this guy? Again, we've waxed lyrically about his upside that he's proven at AFL level for considerable stretches. That's
true.
That's a fact. Those are just hard numbers. Jan 1, when we don't know the role.
No idea.
But by the time round 1 lockout is, or by the time probably even you're drafting a week or so before that,
you'll know.
You'll have a good idea. Yeah,
no, it's fair enough too. So then drafting, where he goes on draft day is interesting because of that point. If he's in the role, and he's had a good preseason, okay, some people might really start warming up, especially the more you start tinkering through January and you're like changing variables, an injury to a guy like it. Maybe you had Sam Walsh in your team picker and you're like, okay, he's missing. That changes who I want in that range. We start to need to make adjustments upon adjustments when we start making changes. So if he's got the role, where he goes is fascinating. If he doesn't have the role, man, he'll go super late for that reason. But where do you have Hall going on draft day? He's got the potential to be a D1, but I don't see anybody needing necessarily to invest that level of pick space on him.
No, and it is obviously tough at this point of the preseason, MJ, to make that call. Let's make the assumption that he has the role. We've gathered enough information. We've seen it in a preseason game or an intra-club game. I think with that upside, he's probably got to go in that late D1 range. And the reason I say this is there is a big injury risk. Now, draft makes it a little bit easier. You've usually got, injury thresholds that if it's under 25 or 30%, you get your emergency. So that's always great for a guy like Aaron Hall. That might save you, 30 to 40 points if he does go down early of your emergency. But I always think with these guys, they are league-winning picks.
Yeah, they
if it comes off. So you've always got to just give him that little bump. When I think about the top liners, though, he's not ahead of Doherty, not ahead of Sinclair, Dawson, Stewart. There's some guys that, in a 10-team league, he's very late D1 because the upside's probably just not quite worth the risk. And there is a risk at his age with his body and with where North's at.
A rebuild.
There could be a role. There could be a role change throughout the season. There's no guarantee that role's constant throughout.
No.
So for me, he's probably a late D1. Now, typically that means you're probably looking in, 60s, 50s and 60s.
Pick overall, yeah.
Because you're probably going to have your 25, 30 mids that you just feel like they're rocks.
Yeah.
Then you've got there's some really good forwards this year.
Yeah, there's some really nice top 6 to 10 forwards, yeah.
So I think he's probably in the 50s and 60s, MJ, which, is a 6th or 7th rounder. I just think much before that, you're really banking on some upside and you're probably passing on some real key tenants in your team.
Yeah.
But again, I wouldn't be wanting to let him get to past the 10th round because purely the upside by that point is so much higher than anyone else that's around in the 10th round.
Exactly right. And again, it's easy to replace injured guys in salary cap formats because it's a trade and you can almost get a comparable selection in drafts. You get a guy expecting a 90 in AFL Fantasy Dream Team formats or high 90s in Supercoach. Man, you're replacing it off the waiver wire and the player pool, which is, you could probably grab an 80 most weeks, but that's where it does start to hurt when you invest early capital picks on a guy and not be able to recoup it. The best way to counterbalance an injury risked player is you protect that by drafting an extra deeper defender than you might normally like to. So you might be drafting a defender. Again, say you've got 5 defenders on the field, you might draft a sixth defender that's probably still quite not just rosterable, but placeable on the field, if for no other reason than just a protection and insurance. That could be the way you could mitigate that. Aaron Hall's a fascinating player to consider. Maybe before this podcast or before the article, you hadn't even considered him, but the love was there 12 months ago. The only thing that has changed is that the injury history was proven true. However, you're only injury prone until all of a sudden you just figure your body out and it stops. What Aaron Hall does in 2023, man, it could be an absolute roller coaster ride, but it could be, as Kane said a few times, a competition winning move. Hey, Kane, appreciate your work on this podcast today. Love hanging out with you and having you on these 50 most relevant episodes.
Always a pleasure, MJ. Thank you.
If you want to go and read the article, it is online for you now at coachespanel.tv. An article will accompany one of these podcasts every single day. 49 players left to reveal. If you haven't subscribed to this, wherever you're getting this podcast from right now, you can just subscribe and follow, and you can keep up to date with it all. And the good news is this. Our Patreon supporters, who not only help us do what we do, they get some extra exclusive content pieces nuggeted throughout the year. Kane and I have been dropping Keeper League content for coaches that love that, and a bunch of other things have dropped. But here's what we give for our breakout and premium tier Patreons. We give you these podcasts 24 hours early. So they already know who's at number 49. They already know which defender, yep, that's a clue, is coming up tomorrow. So if you'd like to know who they are, coachespanel.tv has all the links to join our Patreon supporter group, and you'll be ahead of the pack of everybody else. We look forward to chatting to you tomorrow, friends. From me, MJ, Kane, and the rest of the Coaches Panel, I hope you've had a fantastic start to your 2023 and more daily content coming from you, from us, here this preseason.